There's a lot in the news today, isn't there? Between the news coming out of Venezuela this weekend with the United States going in and actually removing a president and his wife and bringing them to the United States, to some information that Vince Lancy put out yesterday about the U.S. government going in combination with J.P. Morgan to build a refinery in Tennessee to start smelting some strategic metals. There's a lot in the news, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. Today is January the 5th. It's a Monday. The market has been open for a few hours in America. It's about a little bit before noon Central Standard Time. And so I wanted to talk about some of the things that are going on in the news, how they might affect the silver market in particular, and also some other things that I think would be really good for us to be taking into consideration right now. I started a chart back on the 29th of December when, if you will recall, we had a massive range that day. Silver hit its all-time high on the spot market of $83.96, and then a low of $70.46 at one point. It actually closed lower that day at about $76, a little bit less than that maybe. And so I wanted to kind of look at this range, how we're doing in this range, and also what this range tells us about what the market thinks of some of the news that's coming out lately. Now, let's start with Venezuela. On Saturday, the U.S. sent in their military to go in and arrest the president of Venezuela, Maduro. And they also, at the same time, arrested his wife. They said that they were involved with the drug trade that is harming Americans, so there was a national security interest in that. It's not the first time in American history that we've done that. If you'll recall, Manuel Noriega, a number of years ago, the U.S. did essentially the same thing, maybe not quite in the same manner, but essentially the same thing. So it's not the first time in history that this has happened, but it is a pretty big deal. And then our president came out a little bit later and said that Venezuela would effectively be run by the United States until they were able to get another leadership in place. And of course, there's been some chaos since that point, but what does that do? I heard some analysts saying that this was going to be a big deal for the gold and silver and oil markets because now there would be more available. But think about the worldwide supplies of commodities as a big swimming pool. Just because you take water out of one end of the swimming pool and you pour it into the other end, it doesn't do anything at all to the level of the water in the swimming pool. And so the idea that somehow we're going to have more available in the world is just not accurate. Might the United States have more available since now we have a little bit more say in what's going on? I suppose that certainly is a possibility, and it's helped some of the big oil companies, but it really hadn't moved oil prices much. And even though silver and gold have gone up today, I don't think that had anything at all to do with it, other than maybe just because precious metals very often on a bigger scale are insurance against unsettling times, and the world's getting more and more chaotic, you have to admit. So that could have had something to do with it, but it was not. I feel pretty confident because of the supply of gold or silver that Venezuela may or may not have. Another item that came out in the news yesterday was an article by Vince Lancy. Vince is a pretty smart guy when it comes to precious metals. He put an article on the Scottsdale Mint site, and it talked about a new smelter that the United States is planning. They're planning it in conjunction with Korean Zinc. I believe they're the ones that are going to come in, at least on an advisory capacity. And so the U.S. War Department, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and J.P. Morgan, of course, are going to be involved in getting this smelter in Tennessee. And so what will that do? Is that doing anything to the price of silver? And I feel pretty confident you can say that's not having any effect at all on the silver market or the gold market or any other market, because the U.S. smelter is not even set to go into production, or at least under construction, until 2027, and they don't even think it will be in operation until 2029. Now, it's a big deal from the perspective of the United States government actually realizing that we need to start being more in control of our strategic metals, whether they're officially called that or not. Silver and gold certainly are, and some of the other ones. But that's good news from that perspective. But as far as doing anything to the market today, when it's not even going to start having an effect until 2029, I think is pretty far stretched. So is the U.S. smelter a big deal? I think it is. The people who are involved with it are rather interesting when you look at those partnerships, and tells you a little bit something about where the U.S. government and at least J.P. Morgan stand on our strategic metals. But other than that, it really is not going to have any short-term effect. Maybe long-term, and maybe once the smelter gets going in 4 years, if it in fact gets up and going in that time, 3 or 4 years. But we'll have probably a new administration in between now and then, and so who knows if this is something that will ever come into actuality. So keep that in mind as well. But what we do have, I believe, is an interesting silver market. It does appear that it is starting to have some momentum that's maybe being reestablished from the loss of momentum that we had after the first of the year. And so let me just go back very briefly and talk about that. On December the 29th, there had been a lot of rumors going on about silver and gold, and silver in particular. When it opened up, after a real quick dip, it started to go up, and it kept going up on the Hong Kong market to where it reached $83.96. And when it hit that point, it started to go down, and it kept on going down, and it actually reached a level of $70.46 before it bounced back to close somewhere over $76. And so the reason that I like this particular range is these types of ranges are rare. Now, outside days, a day where you have a higher high and a lower low, are not necessarily rare, but they are somewhat unusual. And you can, I think, draw certain conclusions from history as to what might happen in the short term after an outside day occurs. And so we had one of the largest outside days, if not the largest, in the history of the U.S. silver market on nominal terms. And when it closed, it actually closed down from the opening. And that's significant because when you have an outside day or an inside day close down, very often that's kind of a signal that the next day or two, or at least upcoming period, is also going to be down a little bit. And that was pretty accurate. Even though the next day, on the 30th of December, it actually went up a little bit, it went down, somewhere in the $71 range before it settled over, I believe, $72. And then we had the same thing. It opened up obviously at the same point that it closed. It went up to a little over 76. This was the last trading day of the year, which I believe was significant because it was very much in the interest of the big players who had a large short position to get it below $70. And while it touched the bottom of this range and actually went through for a few minutes, it immediately bounced back up. And so the closing for the year was over $70, actually over $71. And I believe that was pretty significant. The people that had an interest in bringing it below that were not able to do so. So when we opened up, it was the day after New Year's, and we didn't have just an awful lot of activity or an awful lot of volume. And so we had an inside day that day. And inside days, like outside days, have some significance in the fact that if they close down, it's very likely to show a short-term trend that maybe the market's going to keep going down, or if it closes up, again, a short-term trend at least, that it might start going up. And in fact, that's what we have today. Today is the 5th. It's Monday, January the 5th. We opened up, I believe, at $72.77. It dipped to $72.60, and then it went up to nearly $78 before it's come down a little bit. I think it's somewhere right in this range as I'm filming this, which is about 11:30 Central Standard Time. The market was at $76.56. So right about here, What it will do for the next part of the day, who knows? But this is the part I wanted to really remind you of. We're still in this trading range. And again, since it was such a wide trading range, it's quite unusual to have anything that big. It kind of gives us some opportunities, not so much to buy and sell the physicals, because as you know, there's such a commission at this price point that it really doesn't pay. Even if you'd have bought down here at $70 and you wanted to sell at 76, well, the commission would probably eat up all of your profit, and you would end up with nothing. So those who bought down here and held their physicals are still sitting on about a $6 profit. But like I say, I like to trade these ranges with stocks, with mining stocks, because they tend to be fairly sensitive to price. I really don't recommend day trading, but with a small percentage of your trading funds, when you get into a range like this, if you watch the market and you have a little bit of time, you can kind of trade back and forth. It's not a lot of money, so you're not going to lose a lot if the market reverses on you. These are just some ideas. I do want to make mention of this. There are some things in the news that are just absolutely false. I would really avoid some of these AI programs that are telling you the market's going to go way up, and then the next day they tell you the market's going to go way down. It's sensationalized to try and get you to watch their channel. Is there something beyond that? I know there's been a lot of speculation as to whether this actually originated in Asia or if it originated in America or somewhere else. If it's a psyop by one government or the other trying to just unsettle people, or if it's just somebody or group of people who are trying to get a lot of views so they can make a little money off of YouTube. And they've certainly had a lot of views on their different channels. But again, AI is what it is. It says it's artificial intelligence, and while it may have some form of intelligence, it's got a lot of things in it that maybe if you just step back and look at just your natural intelligence will tell you there's something that's not quite right about that. I wouldn't get real excited about the stories coming out of this artificial intelligence group of channels. Are they presenting some accurate information? Absolutely. Probably 80 to 90% of their information is accurate, but they've got enough inaccurate that you can get hurt if you try and follow what they're doing. So I would stick with some of the old standbys. I mentioned Vince Lancy and his article. That's an excellent article. Something just to keep in mind for the future, because it does tell what's going to be happening in a few years in America. And it also tells what the mindset of the government and some of the big banks is right now, to the point where they're actually investing billions of dollars into a project like this. Those are things that I think are very worthwhile keeping up with and just kind of filing away in your overall base of knowledge for any kind of plans that you might be making. If you've got long-term plans and you've invested in silver, especially some type of a silver that's less than 999 fine, we're going to have more refinery capacity in a few years. And whether or not that actually is going to be refinery capacity that's ever used for the private market, I don't know that that's as much of a big deal as the fact that they are building this capacity up to be able to do that in case they ever need it. And again, I'm a little bit suspicious on some of these things. When they declared silver was a strategic metal, I wondered if that doesn't give them a little leeway for the future to declare a national emergency and do something with the silver that lay in the hands of private individuals. And then when we see a big refinery or a big smelter like this coming on board in a few years, well, that just gives them a capacity, if they ever decide they want to take some silver, to be able to do so. One of the things that I really do think that is interesting about this is it will put a greater demand. Obviously, the government has a greater interest in these strategic metals right now, including silver, and that means that will translate usually to a greater demand, and a greater demand always tightens the supply on the other side, and that has a tendency to drive the price up. So these are great things to be aware of. I think they're very interesting to look at. Are they going to affect the market today, Venezuela and the U.S. smelter? No, they're really not going to affect the market today. But If you're a long-term holder, it does give you just a few more pieces to understand that the demand looks like it may be here to stay for a while. And demand right now in the precious metals, and particularly silver, is at an all-time high. Will it continue to be so? Nobody knows, but it looks pretty good right now. And even though we're in a range, we're at least still holding support in that range for right now. And we may start testing the top before too long as well. So that'll be interesting also. Well, that's the video for today. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I've really enjoyed the comments. I've learned a lot. I've gotten information from some of y'all's comments that I was absolutely not aware of. A lot of the comments or people making them don't agree with me, but sometimes I learn even more from those who don't agree with me than I do when it's just kind of an echo chamber. So please leave whatever comments that you'd like to pass along to the rest of this community. It's very much appreciated and it's very helpful. For those of you who are subscribed, I really appreciate that. And for those of you who have watched this far, again, I truly appreciate your patience in doing so. But thank you for watching today. I hope we'll see you again next time. God bless.